listeners, welcome to the 6th episode of Sister Radio. I am Aqui. We share a new episode every full moon and every new moon. We are a podcast by Sister Library, a community-run, community-owned feminist library based in Bombay. At Sister Radio, we talk to sisters from all walks of life about everything, including the current state of the world, art, activism, politics, and reading books written by female authors. Here we also learn ways to be a sister supporter. I have a really great news about the library to share with you. I hope you stay until the end of this episode to know what it is. If you want to support us, please share this podcast with your friends and your family. If you have a minute, please leave us a review, leave us a comment. We'll really appreciate that, and it will help us reach more and more people. For today's episode, I'm so pleased to invite my sister Shruthi Venkatchalam. Shruthi is a doctoral scholar at Center for Gender and Violence Research, School for Policy Studies, University of Bristol. She is also a practitioner coach for value-based leadership training and facilitates legal awareness sessions on disability rights and sexuality education for people with disabilities. She has co-created a training module on disability and disaster risk reduction, focusing specifically on children and adults with disabilities. She has worked in India, in the United Kingdom, United States, and Europe. Let's begin. Hello, Shruthi, my dear. How are you?
Hi, Aki. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I've been okay. It's been difficult, but I have been managing because I've been making a lot of calls to my sisters like you, and it gives me so much pleasure and happiness that you could make time for us today. And I'm so looking forward to learning everything that you share about your work with us today. But before we go there, can you tell us where you are and how is the situation there right now?
Yeah. Right now, I'm in Chennai. The situation here is not so good when it comes to the state as such. Tamil Nadu, it's one of the, top in the list, like where there are a highest number of cases. It's not a nice situation. It's not a peaceful situation here.
Yeah, it has been so difficult. I find it so difficult to deal with it. What are you doing to cope with?
It's very difficult. Sometimes I just go wordless to express how I'm feeling. It's been very difficult to cope with the situation. It's been 5 months since I've stepped out, really. It has affected both on my personal and as well as my professional life. Yeah, to some extent, coping with the help of music, cooking, family. We hear a lot of people talking about new normal and things like that, but it's not that easy to get into that space, like to transform and to accept and to reschedule or redesign things, our way of life, everything.
Yeah, definitely. Now more than ever, we are spending so much time on screens and we are totally dependent on the internet. Feels like it is so exclusionary to a lot of people who don't have access to screens, and it's affected everything. It has affected work and relationships and the demands that we face constantly. Work has suddenly become a very difficult space to deal with, especially for those of us confronting many different systems of historical injustice. Totally not new, not surprising that this whole discourse around the new normal is made without centering us. Again, how is this new? Anyway, tell us what you have been working on.
So as I said, I'm doing my PhD and my research broadly spans around gender, disability, and access to justice. So basically, I'm looking at disabled women and the different kinds of violence they get subjected to, what justice means in relation to their experience of violence and impairment. So this is what I'm working on.
Wow, that sounds so fascinating. How were you inclined to study such an important and sensitive subject?
Actually, I wouldn't say it's just an interest. It's more of curiosity, or I mean, the urge to know more about this subject started with my own experience, my own personal life. I'm a person with vision impairment. I'm a disabled woman. I was doing my MA in social work. I was doing my field work around the issues of disability. I mean, I was placed in an institution which it's a shelter for women with psychosocial disabilities. So, and I saw a lot of emotional abuse that the women were subjected to by the staffs and other who work there. It disturbed me a lot, and when I started thinking about it more, I was reflecting on my own life, like me being a disabled woman, the experiences that I underwent. So, and I started googling like studies or articles that speaks about violence against disabled women. It was surprising. There were not many studies carried out in this particular topic, and especially in the Indian context, there were very few research. I'm talking about this in the year 2012-13, during that time. Even now, there are not many studies. I was surprised, and I was also a little disturbed because we in India, I mean, violence against women is one of the discussed topic, especially among the women's group. But there are hardly discussions that gets attention about violence against disabled women. So that's how my interest began to explore more about this topic. I wanted to know more about the women's stories.
That sounds amazing, Shruti, and I'm sure it's going to be such a great study. I can't wait to read it. But also, I'm thinking about really the absence of discourses around sexual violence on disabled women within the larger feminist discourse in the South Asian region. It is something that I have felt and I've noticed. What do you think is the reason for it?
It's a very interesting question, and I think still, even today, researchers or activists who work on this particular issue across the globe, they are trying to come up with reasons for this invisibility within the feminist movement or discourse. So, for me, I would say is from my conversations with few activists or few academicians, is one thing women say, the general women, like non-disabled women, what they say is that there is no enough representations of disabled women across different forums. Women in general, they don't understand different barriers and different struggles that a disabled woman have to undergo in terms of when she wants to participate or when she wants to represent in any of like public forums. That understanding is, I think it's missing big time. I would also say even the studies also highlight stating that on one side, the women's groups say that they don't have enough resources to support disabled women, and that is one of the reasons that they just tend to not pay so much attention to including the voices or in accommodating disabled women in their discourse. In some spaces, I've just heard people saying basically there is no proper understanding of disability in general. Even from my personal experience, if I participate in any conferences or in any discussion, when a non-disabled person, when they see me, they just tend to either infantilize me or they tend to ignore my presence. Some people, they don't know how to react or how to even talk to me. I think that is one reason where non-disabled individuals, they fail to recognize and treat a disabled as an equal human being. And another significant reason that I feel is when it comes to disabled women, it's not a single identity, because disability cuts through different identities that are already there in the society. So a disabled woman could have other marginalizing identities also. Yeah, there are multiple identities. When everything gets together, there's no space at all. Not only within the feminist movement, even within the disability movement, the patriarchal mentality has sidelined the representation of disabled women, where we get to hear a lot of representation from men and not the women.
That is such a great reflection, Shruti. And I'm also pretty sure that the women who speak are
Exactly.
mostly
Of women who have certain privileges.
Yeah, you just so wonderfully articulated experiences of women with disabilities and having to contest different social realities. I wonder how you have been able to navigate coming from a backward caste and then living with a disability.
So for me, I do acknowledge that I do have certain privileges. In terms of one big privilege that I would say is the family support that I have received and I'm still receiving. Especially when I talk about my family, my mother has been very important inspiration for me. She has played a significant role in my life, where from my childhood, I mean, she constantly keeps saying that I have to be independent. And that was one big factor, and she is a very independent woman. I think especially in the Indian society, the family plays a very significant role for girls to take forward what they wanted to be. In many families, like they do give that space, and in some families, like I mean, the women, they fight to create a space for themselves. But for me, I had the privilege where I had the space for me to explore things, learn things. When it came to my education, I had the space to decide what I want to study, and there was no external pressure and there was no big expectations. After my 10th board exams, I had a good score. I had more than 90%. Yet I didn't want to pursue my 11th grade because I was not very convinced with the subjects that the school offered me, because there were certain stereotypes that a blind person can study only so and so subjects. I want to break that. So I just left that school where I was studying. I went on to do my diploma in audio engineering. I was the first disabled woman to study audio engineering.
Wow, you're such a total baddie, Shruti. Look at you.
Till my master's, it was just okay. I have to do my undergrad and my postgrad. At least I should have a postgrad degree. After my master's, I was struggling to get a job. Many organizations who came for campus interview, they were not very keen in appointing a person with disability. In one or two organizations, I was directly asked, "You yourself, you're disabled. How do you think that you can go and help other people who are struggling in their lives?" So these were questions.
What? No,
Yeah.
that is horrible.
Yeah, so I was asked such questions once after the degree when I was out and when I was looking for a job. I was seeing the other side of the world. I mean, it was not as I thought, sitting inside the campus. So till then, I was not very keen in getting into academia. Yeah, after my master's, I was at home for 2-3 months. Then I got to know that there was a vacancy in one of the university in my hometown. I applied for the post. It was a temporary post. I applied. Luckily, I got the job. I was working for a year, and during that time, I realized that teaching gave me a sense of independence, and I really started loving the profession. After 1 year of teaching experience, I decided, okay, this is the time that I have to complete my higher studies. And I started reading actually books only when I joined MPhil. So till then, reading was not my habit. It was a compulsion. I started enjoying reading and I started reading more books. I was very interested to read different narratives of women, not only disabled women, but women with other identities also. I started reading things with a critical perspective. I completed my MPhil and fortunately I got a scholarship to do PhD abroad. That's how I landed in University of Bristol. That's my journey into academia.
Fascinating trajectory and so very inspiring. How different would you say studying in Bristol is compared to
Yeah,
India?
Definitely there are similarities and differences. I would say teaching and learning, I find more or less same. I would say in Bristol, I'm having a lot of support system, especially in terms of accessing resources. I've been given a support worker because she helps me with downloading articles, scanning books, whatever academic support I require. So the university is ready to provide. Other than academics, yes, Bristol, for me personally, I feel it's a safe space to move around because in India, I have hardly walked on streets with my cane. Always, I used to have a sense of fear when I move, when I walk alone. But whereas in Bristol, I never used to feel that, okay, someone would come and harm me or someone would come and just attack me. So there's much more understanding about disability is required both in India and in Bristol. But in Bristol, at least there are few support systems put in place. At least I can go and ask for help. And to some extent, whatever I ask, it would be addressed. But in India, it's not like that. You have to fight, you have to make a big noise about it. That's the difference.
It's so interesting that you share this because there is an articulation within the feminist theory and the larger feminist movement around how women have no autonomy on our own bodies in
Yeah.
public spaces. Would
Yeah.
you say it's even more so for disabled women?
In terms of when it comes to here in India, I had a couple of bad experiences. With me, what happens is people, they just, without my permission, they just tend to like hold my hand and drag me and things like that. So those things, it scares me a lot. In the first place, you don't know how the person is, and nobody has the right to touch the other person without their permission. Yes, it's definitely when it comes to disabled women, the autonomy is, it gets blurred. It's not thought much about because a disabled body is in need of help. And when the body is in need of help, it is understood that I'm just helping, there's nothing harm in it. But so it's an interesting factor. When we talk about violence against disabled women, the kind of violence that these women experience, it's even more unique because a lot of violence is not even recognized as violence, especially when a person is helping a disabled woman in terms of helping her to move from her wheelchair to a different place. There are lots of possibilities for that person to touch the disabled woman in an inappropriate manner. So most such things, it goes unrecognized and unspoken because the woman who is also receiving the help, she's also at some point she gets confused in terms of in understanding whether this person is helping me or whether this person is utilizing this opportunity to abuse me. So even if the disabled woman wants to speak about it, there's no language and she doesn't have a safe space to speak about it, especially when the person is care worker or is someone who's a close family member.
I totally understand what you're saying because even us, for the longest time, we did not have the language to articulate what we went through since the
Yeah.
violence on the bodies of indigenous women was not considered sexism or misogyny since the standard
Yeah.
narrative was already
Yeah.
put down by the upper caste mainlander women. So for us, it
Yeah.
was a contestation to articulate even to form this
Yeah.
language because our experiences were just put under the umbrella
Yeah.
of racism.
Yeah. Exactly.
I was going to ask you for your doctoral studies, why did you pick justice and looking at how disabled women define justice. Why was it important to you?
Came from my MPhil research. I was specifically looking at the experience of disabled women who were subjected to sexual violence, who had reported their abuse and who had court hearings. When I was doing that, I had the opportunity to speak to the survivors, rape survivors. So all these women, they had their cases under trial. More than 90% of violence, it doesn't get reported because in the first, the disabled women themselves are not comfortable in filing the complaint. The family is not okay. And there are also other reasons like there are no support systems put in place for the disabled women to file a complaint in the event of violence. So I did ask them what justice means to them. Interestingly, everybody had a different answer for it. That actually did open up to explore more about justice, because for many women, the legal justice, they just used it as a tool. For them, it was not the end means where to punish the accused.
Absolutely brilliant, Shruti. And it's so great because here is a scope for disabled women to articulate law. Like, since within the feminist philosophy of law, there is articulation of how patriarchy influences legal structures.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, I think this will go a long way towards understanding how justice looks to women with disabilities. I was also wondering if you can tell us about the provisions, if there are any, within the Indian legal system for disabled women when making complaints.
Yes, there are. So I always have this argument with lawyers. So they say, okay, why do you need a special law? So disabled women, they get accounted under the general term violence against women. But I always like disagree with them. I say, no, it's not. The experiences are different. Understanding of violence itself is different. And the concerns are different. The general provision cannot completely address concerns when it comes to disabled women. There are also certain groups who are constantly struggling to include disability as one of the discriminating factor in the Indian Constitution. The 2013 Criminal Amendment Act, it did bring some provisions incorporated in the investigation procedures also. It says that in the case of disabled women, the women need not go to the police station. If she makes a complaint to the police has to carry out the investigation in her residence or the place that she feels comfortable, and the investigation has to be accompanied along with a special educator or a sign language interpreter, and the investigation has to be videographed. There are provisions like this that has been incorporated, but the sad part is it lacks implementation. I did interview police officers, I did speak to journalists, lawyers, and the sad part was nobody knew that there are such provisions that has been brought in IPC and CRPC. The new disability law, like the Rights of Persons with a Disability Act 2016, it highlights that disabled women and girls are more prone to experiencing violence and abuse. But the law is just there, but no measures have been initiated.
Yeah, these are such important things to think about. Like, what does it really mean when a law is created and put down on paper, executed on ground? How does it affect societal change? These are questions that we have to ask, especially when certain laws demanding cultural change. These are
Yeah.
harder questions that we have to ask. But also, you raised such an important concern with
Yeah.
young disabled girls are more prone to violence and harassment. It is such a huge concern, and yeah, such an important thing to think about. But also a perfect time for me to ask you about your childhood. Tell us, how was it when you were growing up?
And when I look at my childhood experience in comparison with a fellow disabled, who had their education in a special school, I think there are lots of difference. So as I said, one of my privilege, I would say I had the opportunity to have my schooling till my fifth grade. I studied in a normal school. I was admitted to a Christian missionary school. I was in my first grade, and the teachers there, they didn't know what problem I actually had. I was not treated well, and I eventually at some point I said no, I'm not going to this. I went to a different school. So there I did receive some support. I still remember when my handwriting used to be very bad, but still, like, the teachers, they used to encourage me to participate in handwriting competition, drawing competition. So it was nice to experience and compete with other non-disabled children. And at home also, I was not treated very differently. I did get some special attention, but it was not that where they did not overprotect me. From my sixth grade, I changed to a different school. So I did have my schooling from an inclusive education. Yeah, I learned Braille. So I started using Scribe for writing my exams. So yeah, it was nice. I did enjoy. At the same time, I had one thing which my mother strongly believes in God. She looks out for cure. So she used to take me to different places for healing and all. So everybody, they just bluntly, they would start the conversation saying that it's the karma and all. So I did not have anybody who were sharing a similar experience. I didn't have anybody around me to share what I was going through, because somewhere I felt, okay, this person can't understand me. So even with my own, like, I am very selective in sharing things.
Wow, I feel so special that you're sharing such intimate things with us today, Shruti. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now I would want you to kindly share with us a list of books that you'd want our listeners to read.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah. So I would recommend reading Susan Wendel's The Rejected Body. I think it was published in 1996. And so when I first read this, I think I remembered initial days when I was trying to understand the lives of disabled women, and it was so fascinating to read this book. It reflected some of the questions that were also bothering me. Yeah, I would highly recommend reading this book in understanding the politics, especially when it comes to body. The other book that I would also recommend is Pride Against Prejudice by Jenny Morris. It was published in the year 1991. This book also, it talks about the intersections of disability and feminist agenda. In this book, she talks about her own journey. Till some age, Jenny Morris was a non-disabled woman who was very active in women's rights. And later, due to some accident, she became disabled. She reflects on how things changed and how she started looking life like being a disabled woman. And it's a very nice book to read from someone who has been active in women's movement till some point, and after, like, very active in disability movement, highlighting the voices of disabled women. And someone who wants to read specifically about bodies and staring gaze, I would recommend reading Rosemary Garland, Extraordinary Bodies. So that is also an interesting book. To recommend some Indian writers, I would highly recommend to read Anita Guy's Disembodied Form, Issues of Disabled Women. I think it was published in 2003 or 2002. I don't remember the year. And there are many articles written by Renu Adlaka. And another thing, like, if someone is interested in reading autobiography, then I would recommend Malini Chit's One Little Finger, where she talks about disability, gender, sexuality. For someone to understand more about disabled women, I think reading autobiographies would help a lot.
That is such a great list, Shruti. I know what books to buy now for the library next. Thank you so much for your lovely suggestions. And now it's time for me to ask you if you have any advice for young disabled women from backward castes who are looking to get into academia.
First thing I think what restricts people is fear. We need to let go the fear and we need to have like faith in ourselves in what we think. Academia is not a very welcoming space for people, especially with multiple identities. So there would be a lot of discouraging factors. So let's be clear in what we want to do. Let's be fearless in making our views and making our voice clear and strong. Let's be sensitive to different identities. Let's respect, value different identities, because one thing which really bothers me is we have different movements. We have Dalit movement, we have women's movement. In women's movement, they don't recognize other identities and the struggles on Dalit movement as well. They talk about one particular discrimination. If we say no to discrimination, it means no in any way, in any form. So let's not fight against certain discrimination and let's not perpetuate certain discrimination.
That is such good advice, Shruti. Thank you so much for sharing that with our listeners, and I so appreciate it. It's so essential to be mindful of divisive politics, to what it does, and really to invest in solidarity and coming together. It is so solid and so great. I was wondering if you have an organization that you want to give a shout out to during this time.
One particular organization right now which comes to my mind is Thiyagam Trust. They work with disabled women from rural background doing such a wonderful work. So I just want to acknowledge the work that they do and kudos to them.
Brilliant. Okay, now tell us how one can be a sister supporter.
One simple thing is listening different women without any judgments. Judging people is one big discouraging factor for women to open up and speak. Let's listen to each other and support each other.
Great, sweet. Thank you, Shruti, for that wonderful advice. Where can we follow your work on social media or otherwise?
I'm not very active in social media. I'm there on Facebook. So my ID is Shruthi Venkatchalam. And if not, I can share my email ID.
Yeah, okay.
SHRUTHI V for Victor, VENKAT.6 @gmail.com.
Thanks, Ma. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for making time for us. It was a great conversation. I so thoroughly enjoyed it.
It was indeed a very interesting and it was a very nice conversation.
Yeah, as always, I am so happy to see you accomplishing such great feats. I'm here with you, I'm standing with you, and it gives me so much joy to be able to call you my friend and my sister.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And just thank you so much for doing what you do and being who you are. Appreciate you and I love you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much. It feels so nice to have this conversation, especially during this time, because it gives me, I mean, for me personally, it gives me some meaning to my life where I've been given a space to share my journey and my experience. So it's so nice. It feels so good actually. Yeah, thank you so much, Aqui, for having this conversation.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I'll see you soon, okay? Take care.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Thank you so much once again for joining us for today's episode of Sister Radio. You just heard a conversation between me, Akitami, and my dearest sister, Shruthi Venkat. Music for Sister Radio is composed by my loveliest sister, Shasha Patel. You'll find Shruti's contact info also in the show notes. And you'll find the crowdfunder link for supporting Sister Library and Sister Radio in the show notes as well. Please consider making a contribution if you can. Any amount will be super appreciated and will go a long way. And now for the good news. I'm so happy to share that we will soon be opening Sister Press in Sister Library. Sister Press will be a space for women to come together and experiment with publishing using the library as a resource center. We will start operations in September. It's such a happy news for us. If you'd like to know more, follow our work on Instagram and Twitter, and you can also email us. Our email is ilovereadingwomen@gmail.com. Our Instagram is sister.library and our Twitter is sisterlibrary. I'll see you next time. Until then, please take very good care of yourselves and keep celebrating women.